Hey, welcome back. Today's video is about how ES and consistency aren't the same thing. They're not equal to one another. Let me give you an example. Headspace. The simple function of making the brass fit the chamber. Low variability in the outcome of your sizing process is not the same as consistency in your sizing process. 2007 inch, the thickness of a piece of Scotch tape, just the standard stuff. Is the difference between having a bolt that will close easily and one that won't close at all. It can be the difference between a rifle that is in tune or out of tune. It can be the difference between a rifle that stays in tune from batch of ammo to one that's finicky and difficult to get along with. It can be the difference between good ES and bad ES. Now, those are subject to a couple of things, mostly your ignition system. But no matter which way you look at it, 2007 inch is ultimately the difference between winning and losing. If you get the right dimensions on your cases, you have a chance of winning. If you get the wrong dimensions, especially the wrong direction, your chances of winning go down remarkably. Now, I've watched more than a few shooters, experienced reloaders, people that should know better, have difficulty closing the bolt on loaded rounds because their headspace was wrong. I always scratched my head about it until I was setting up to size 6.5 Creedmoor the other day, and I realized what it is that people do that get them into trouble. So let me explain. When you have a standard die setup with a standard shell holder, and you're screwing that die in and out, trying to get to a dimension 2 thousandths shorter than your measured brass, you have a couple of things working against you. The first is you don't have a baseline number. The dimension of the brass isn't necessarily the dimension of the chamber. If you just take this random piece of brass, push it back 2007 inch, did you do yourself any favors? What if it didn't fully fit the chamber to begin with? What if it was an overpressure round and it's longer than the chamber? You didn't check before you did that, did you? You didn't put it back in the rifle. So there's a baseline error here that you could have just from the brass itself. Next, we have that adjustability. We have a 7/8 14 thread that we're screwing in and out, trying to get 1/1000ths, half a thousandths adjustment on. Some of you might be pretty good at this, and you might have those micro adjusters on your dies. But even at that, the likelihood of getting the same outcome from session to session if you take the die out of the press is pretty darn low. Let's just be honest about it. It's pretty darn low, especially if you're loading multiple cartridges with the same press. Now, I load everything on one old RCBS rock chucker, so I know the pain of doing this. And I've come up with a simple methodology that prevents me from setting up wrong when I set up for a cartridge. And that is using Redding competition shell holders. Now, these competition shell holders are only in 2007 inch increments. That means if you have to go one shell holder, you're going to change that shoulder dimension by 2 thousandths. But you're going to have to trust me here. If you are at half a thousandths and you decide to go to 2.5 thousandths, as long as you're always at 2.5 thousandths, you're going to be fine. That's clearance between the brass and the chamber, not shoulder bump. I want to discard the thought of shoulder bump. Shoulder bump, the idea of moving the shoulder a fixed amount, is fraught with peril. Instead, I want you to think about shoulder clearance, the clearance between the brass and the chamber with the bolt closed on a sized piece of brass. That's the dimension that's important. Try to get that the same over and over and over again. And since chambers rarely change dimension, getting the same dimension over and over again when you measure the brass is a good idea. Now, there's a couple ways to do it. You could simply write down what this dimension is and then always measure to that dimension for each and every sizing process, and you're going to get it. You're going to get the same thing over and over again, regardless of how the brass comes out of the rifle. The other way you can do it is use the same shell holder over and over again and use a hard contact between the die and the shell holder. That hard over-center contact on this RCBS rock chucker press eliminates any variability in the press. Presses move, they stretch under stress. The amount of force that it takes to press the brass into the die is going to change from piece of brass to piece of brass on occasion, and that may come from lubrication variations or just from the amount of pressure the brass experienced during its firing. Either way, that hard stop is going to give you the best chance of getting the same dimension over and over again. And better yet, each and every time you set up that die against that shell holder and get a good hard over center, you're going to get the same outcome. Whether it's the first firing or the 10th firing, you're going to get the same dimension inside the die. Now, if you aren't annealing, you may have to shorten up over time because the brass is going to get harder, it's going to get springier, it's going to spring back more. But ultimately, you have that adjustability built into the system that you can work with to do what you need to do. If you are annealing, when you start annealing and using this process, you're going to get the same outcome every single time you size brass. And that's going to give you the best chance of having a good outcome every time you go shoot the rifle. Trust me, I shot .284 for 10 years, and never once did I have to change my sizing setup. I'd take it out of the press to do expansion, I'd take it out of the press to do decapping, whatever I was doing, put it back in, and I get the same dimension than the very next time I went in. The reason is simplicity. Hard, foolproof systems that prevent you from making mistakes and prevent you from having problems. All right, guys, that's my advice for today. Get your sizing under control and you're going to have a lot more success in your shooting. Until next time, shoot straight, and I'll see you in the next video.